Thank you, Speaker. I must say the second worst part of Budget Week has definitely got to be the fact that there was no private members' business scheduled as the House didn't meet on Monday. The worst part, of course, is listening to the hollow pontification of the Leader of the Opposition's budget reply speech, but my thoughts on that are remarks best saved for another time. I'm joining my colleagues here today who are, of course, fellow members of the Class of 22, the member for Swan and the member for Hunter, in speaking against the member for Capricornia's motion. And for what it's worth, we should remind the House that this is a motion moved by the Shadow Assistant Minister for Manufacturing. Manufacturing is immensely important to me as well. It is important to Spence. It is the industry that was positioned around the establishment and growth of Adelaide's northern suburbs. Spence has the 7th highest percentage of manufacturing business within it, manufacturing for a vast number of industries, from defence to clean energy. But what Spence doesn't manufacture en masse, like we used to anymore, are cars, and we again have those opposite to thank for that. And by virtue of the Shadow Assistant Ministry held by the member for Capricornia, one would have, of course, expect to see a voluminous motion, a treatise, if you will, explaining the Coalition's policies when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to energy, to interest rates and to labour supply shortages. Alas, this is certainly not an opposition with a plan, not a positive policy in sight. What we have here instead is an opposition of 100 negative hollow statements, begging questions which serve as a subtext for the ultimate question. When are the worst days of opposition finally going to be behind them? Soon. Not today. Very soon. And when those opposite can finally divorce themselves from the record of their former government, it's not just the Abbott years but the Turnbull years, and let's not forget the Morrison years too, although we should not forget them entirely, lest we are doomed to repeat them. The motion moved by the member for Capricornia sets itself out to be either coyly naive to or legitimately oblivious of what the Albanese Labor government has done in this past year to move our country forward in this space. And, much like a breakfast at an inner-city cafe, I shall be attempting to deconstruct the member for Capricornia's motion as I plate it up for the chamber on this fine evening. Those opposite are making an audacious leap in logic by attempting to contend that the government has no plans to combat any of the issues faced by a number of manufacturers which have been listed in the member for Capricornia's motion. Whether it be power prices, labour shortages, disruptions to supply chains. I can vividly recall the member for Capricornia voting against the Albanese Labor government's energy plan, voted against the safeguard mechanism, voted against Jobs and Skills Australia Amendment Bill only just a short time ago. Yet the member for Capricornia attempts to say the government has no plans. Don't even get me started. When the member for Capricornia's motion moves onto the National Reconstruction Fund, another piece of legislation that the member and those opposite voted against. In fact, the NRF passed in spite of the member for Capricornia, in spite of the member for Hinkler and in spite of the member for Macmillan. As the record reflects, National Reconstruction Fund Bill received assented to on the 11th of April this year. On the 9th of May, what did we get from the member for Capricornia? A motion pondering why the fund has not yet issued a single dollar to manufacturers. Am I surprised by this? Absolutely not. I'm not even slightly surprised by this stance, as those opposite are scions of a former government renowned for its colour-coded spreadsheets. And that's why I'm not surprised about their air of confusion as to the independent Commonwealth corporate entity that is not yet a month old in the statute books, hasn't started financing projects. But of course, as the member's motion notes, if it had done so, she has severe reservations as to the inflationary effect that any funding would cause, just as an aside. But that mindset, the reluctance, is just part and parcel of the former government to support manufacturing in Australia. It seriously took a hopefully once-in-a-generation pandemic for those opposite to think to themselves, oh golly, maybe it might be a good idea if we made things here in Australia again, and start to unwind the damage they've caused to the industry. Speaker, one of the most important elements of good government is having a good opposition, and all I can say to the member for Capricornia, to those opposite, is do better. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I'll call the member for Hinkler.